to this week's episode of Tales of Logistics. This week, we're focusing on trade, compliance, and serialization. And we have the pleasure to speak with Mr. Rohit Singal. I hope that's correct.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
So Mr. Rohit Singal is a supply chain professional with extensive experience in supply chain management, pharmaceutical manufacturing, data governance, serialization, and trade compliance, as well as logistics. So there's a lot we can learn from him regarding this topic today. Our topic is focusing on trade compliance and serialization. To start with, Mr. Rohit, and you work in these industries for a long time now. What does it look like? What is a typical day like for someone who works in trade compliance and serialization?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me on it. Yeah, so I currently work for a pharmaceutical manufacturing company that is based out of Ireland mainly, but they manufacturing facilities in the US as well. So, and they work with a lot of contract manufacturers across the globe. And they produce multiple brands of medication. You might have heard of Remdesivir that President Trump promoted during COVID as well. So, they produce their own version of that. So it's a lot of activity that happens on a day-to-day basis when it comes to compliance for the multiple brands that the company distributes and manufactures. I would say that the most common categories would be some immediate red flags that come up day-to-day as raw material or finished products, semi-finished products are crossing international boundaries between various facilities. So you have probably sometimes a CMO who did not follow the correct serialization or aggregation guidelines and probably did not report the commissioned serialized numbers. So those kind of shipments may be held up by customs and are an immediate thing to solve. There may also be master data issues, so I have to immediately get on to teams who are in charge of master data governance and quality to see what kind of fallouts may be on the material master front with respect to HS codes and things like that. So storage condition, temperature conditions might be out of sync with what the reality is. So that's one thing. And then also, I would say training is a big aspect of it. We have a big team, so we have to make sure that we are ahead of these issues and well-informed and capable to respond in time. So we training colleagues and teams on, again, HS classification codes, latest standards.
That's a lot of work you do in a day. That's a lot of work. But so what really took you into this field, this supply chain and serialization or trade compliance? What attracted you into that field?
Yeah, I'd be very honest. It wasn't completely by plan. So I started my journey from a very technological background. I hail from India. So at some point I got started with SAP. As an ERP system, I got myself trained on certain modules of SAP. I initially worked in the auto industry where I looked after compliance related to vehicle emissions or vehicle safety standards, quality reporting around that. When I moved to the US in 2017, I got a chance to work on very large-scale pharmaceutical merger at the time between Takeda and Shire Pharmaceuticals. I was with Deloitte Consulting at the time, and that really gave me exposure to how big ERP programs are managed. And compliance was a big part of it because both companies had a good list of brands and wanted to ensure that, all compliance related requirements are taken care of in all global markets. So that gave me exposure to serialization or aggregation based solutions from different perspectives, how they are managed in the system versus, business activities on a day-to-day basis. That's how I got started. And in my current role, I got more exposed to data governance and data standardization practices as well. So we built a lot of solution at Gilead Sciences to ensure that data quality around compliance is up to the mark.
For instance, let's just say I don't work in logistics. I don't work in supply chain. I've never heard about trade compliance or serialization. And this is the first time I'm listening to you speak. How would you explain that to someone who have no idea what those terminologies mean? What does trade compliance and serialization mean to someone like that?
Sure. I would say trade compliance is, first of all, a much bigger umbrella under which there are many elements that any firm needs to take care of and in their supply chain. Let me take the example of serialization and aggregation requirements. So counterfeit medicine in the world, in the global pharmaceutical supply chain is a huge problem. And it has costed many lives, right? So there have been many instances in Africa, India, even United States, Canada. It happens more often than we think that a lot of counterfeit product makes its way into the supply chain. And unfortunately, the end user or the patient can really suffer because of that. So in response to this, the FDA started something called a Drug Supply Chain Security Act. They signed off on it in 2013. And they have implemented that in phases where they require any pharmaceutical product that comes into the United States or goes out of the United States to be trackable and traceable. Meaning that any batch that we buy at a pharmaceutical next to a pharmacy, that should be traced back to its origins. So that's where serialization comes into play. Serialization is like a fingerprint that you're assigning to the unit that you can buy at a pharmacy. And aggregation is nothing but another fingerprint that's assigned to a collection of individual packets. So as you can imagine, these products move around in pallets or cases or bigger units, right, around warehouses. So once the person at the warehouse, they scan the label on that pallet, they have an immediate view into all the individual units that are serialized within that huge pallet, thousands of units that may be there. So that's something that serialization and aggregation technology and business processes enable. Yeah, so that's one example of how serialization and aggregation are very effective. In addition to that, to remain compliant, various customs agencies around the world have different requirements, such as accurately identifying the country of origin of your pharmaceutical product, which sometimes can get very complex to determine in case of pharmaceutical product, So those are a few.
Those are very practical examples that we can relate with, mainly with regards to the pharmaceutical company you just mentioned. Fake drugs, a lot of fake drugs, and the innovation, like you just said, where drugs can be tracked back to their origin makes a lot of sense. And it will prevent more production of fake medication. So when it comes to compliance and serialization, what are some of the things that they are not? Because some people have some myth about serialization or trade compliance, that it should be this, it should be that. But what is trade compliance? And in your own field, serialization is not. What is it?
I would say, let me answer it in a way that I believe is important to realize for many companies, that it is not just an enabler. In today's world, although it is a basic requirement for you to have a successful supply chain which is compliant, but it is a strategic differentiator, for many firms, if successful firms view it like that, because the more integrated and compliant your supply chain is, the better view you have of it, going right back to the source, down to the customer. The more important it is, the better it is, that the faster your product gets to the customer, the more confidence it gives to the customer that, you're coming from legible sources. So it has to be really viewed in that way. And it's not just a paper that you present to a customs officer to just get your product through. It's much more than that.
With regards to compliance, again, in your day-to-day job, what are some of the blind spots, regular blind spots you've seen that some companies tend to overlook, but are very crucial?
Yeah, I would say one of the most common things would be you need to interact with a number of partners in your day-to-day business, customers or contract manufacturers or 3PL logistics partners, and a number of such stakeholders. So you do not want to interact with people who have defaulted financially or otherwise. So denied party screening is very important, and it has to be real time. It cannot be something that you checked once in a month and you refer to the same list throughout the month. So it has to be a continuous business that you do, continuous check, maybe a department dedicated to that. Lapses in this category are quite common. Also, I would say that because of the dynamic nature of this field, you need to keep your master data very complete and up to date. There can be gaps in master data. Sometimes you change your suppliers, you change your contract manufacturers again. And one department took that decision, but the downstream players in the supply chain might not realize that. And there might be gap in regulatory filings as a result and things like that. So you have to be very aware of that. And again, in the same tune, that because you work with so many external partners, you have to ensure that they are also compliant and following the same guidelines required by your business. So if you are sending your serialized product to a third-party logistics provider for them to distribute it to the customer, that 3PL partner should have the ability to understand and read your serialization numbers, right? Serialized barcode, and they should be able to track it in their system so that they can distribute it effectively downstream. So all these, unfortunately, can be quite common sources of errors that should be taken care of.
So now, with regards to what you've said so far, do you have any experience you may want to share with us? One that we all can relate with that has to do with the blind spots and the cruciality of not avoiding those blind spots that we can also, that a listener can listen to and benefit from, even if it's just one.
Like I said, I'll give a couple of examples, maybe from two different categories again. Regarding serialization and aggregation, a contract manufacturer manufactures a certain product for you. It is in a semi-finished state. They have to send it to either your manufacturing facility or another CMO down the line for the next stage of manufacturing. So in the process, they serialize the material, the batch that they produced, but they did not upload the commissioned serialized numbers or the aggregated numbers to the database that is required by the FDA to be updated. So as a result of that, the shipment can get caught at the customs agency. They would scan the shipment and they'd be like, we don't see this number in our database, and you have to produce necessary documentation and respond within a 10-day period. And all the while, the product might have to be stored at a certain ideal temperature or certain conditions that might lead to destruction of the batch ultimately. So you have to be very, very careful about CMOs following your guidelines. Another example, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is that
country of origin,
the country of origin of finished pharmaceutical product can be a little complex to determine based on what all components have gone into the manufacturing of the product and the interpretation of the manufacturing process by different customs agencies around the world. So United States or the CBP can sometimes view it differently compared to the corresponding agency in Europe. So that's another interesting problem that companies might have in Europe. While moving product in the US, you have to produce your customs invoices at various places. So having accurate country of origin and having automation around that is very important, and it can.
So do you think that
wrong sometimes.
Having somebody who works as a trade compliance officer is just enough, or each trade compliance personnel should also have a good knowledge about serialization and aggregation?
From the perspective of a trade officer, I assume you're talking about CBP office, Customs and Border Patrol officer, who has to ensure that the shipment is compliant.
I'm talking from the perspective of the business. The businesses, the complaints, for instance. Any complaint who wants to start doing serialization and they tend to want to hire trade compliance personnel, should they just focus on someone who is a trade compliance personnel or someone who has an extra knowledge on serialization and aggregation?
Yeah, I think from a business's perspective, you would definitely want an expert who knows the serialization and aggregation process in and out. They ideally would be well versed with how international shipments work, how FDA lays out its requirement in the DSCA, like I mentioned, DSCSA, and how the technology is supposed to enable that, meaning that you have to have the physical devices enabled on the assembly line to print out the serialized code on the product, and that rolls up all the way to an ERP system such as SAP ATTP or IBM's products or Oracle's products to track those on the shipments, on the various documentations and things like that. So an ideal person who takes care of business activities around this aspect has to be well versed with all these gamut of expertise to.
So what would you consider as the most difficult part of your job? So for instance, I am a trade compliance person, but want to go deeper into becoming an expert in serialization and aggregation. What are some of the challenges or that I may end up facing or you think that I should know ahead that come to the job?
I would say developing business knowledge can be a blocker. Like you can read, umpteen blogs on this topic, and you can have generic information on how the concept is supposed to work. But practical knowledge is, of course, achieved when you work in a real business scenario where you're dealing with day-to-day problems and trying to solve real-time issues. So that's something that will come with experience. I would urge anyone trying to enter the field to, of course, understand the standardized business process that has been laid down by, FDA, for example, their requirements, how the standardized formats for serialization have been interpreted by GS1, the nonprofit that has, defined the standard, and how it has been adopted by various firms to understand the technology standards behind it. And so that is one part of it. And another aspect I would say is that do not leave technology behind. It might be a bit challenging initially, but one has to understand how a typical IT system may work in this regard, because ultimately in any firm, you have to perform your actions on such a system. So you need to understand how shipments are tracked, how products are marked, how numbers are commissioned and things like that. So understanding the life cycle of something like a SAP ATTP system is highly valuable.
So you've been in the pharmaceutical industry for a while, and I'm guessing you moved to one industry before joining this industry.
Yeah.
So the last place before you moved into this industry, and looking at the both industries, what has been the challenges for you, and what did you learn that in your previous industry that you used here to excel in your job?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would say it is by maturity in terms of understanding business processes that has probably improved over time. Over time, like I said, I started with a technological lens. I was a coder and initially, and then I started diving into ERP systems configuration. Over time, I have come closer to understanding business processes in much better detail, and processes of sourcing and procurement, compliance, trade compliance, international trade, 3PL, 4PL models. So my experience with previous projects has given me a generic understanding of how every company does business their own way, but it has given me confidence into various scenarios that were possible, and I can implement or try to take learnings from those scenarios and try to see how successful or unsuccessful a new scenario can be. And I would also add one more thing, that dealing with data has been quite a learning. Data analysis techniques, data quality rules, governance techniques, all of that. It's interesting to see how an automotive company uses SAP or any ERP system, quite differently compared to a pharmaceutical industry. So it has been a challenge to understand industry-specific products as well. Pharmaceutical products, IT products can be very different compared to something in the automotive industry. So, but at the same time, when you work at a certain industry, your mind kind of expands and tries to apply your learnings to the newer projects that you're working on. So
what about cultural influence?
So
like you said, in a different country from India down to the States. And in our industry, we know that when you're dealing with new customers, new people in a new environment, you have to consider the culture. Like, I work in logistics, and I know I have to consider the culture of the people I'm dealing with. And what about you in your own field? Do you, as a trade compliance / specialist in serialization, have to also consider the cultural environment of the people you deal with that exist in that industry? Does that play any? Okay, to some extent.
Yes,
okay.
To some extent. To some extent, yes, because I feel that that still comes into play, I would say. So let me restart my answer. I would say that it still comes into play when I deal with team members from different parts of the globe. Right?
Because I know in the industry,
I'm trying to give you an example.
I deal with, I focus more on moving vehicles from Canada to the States. And when I'm talking with people in Quebec, it's entirely different for how I have to relate to people in other provinces. And so even if it has to do with just, controlling coordinating the carriers, the truckers, the vehicles, the dealerships, but there is this cultural difference that you also have to consider with the stakeholders involved. So that's what I'm asking. Coming from a different culture and switching between industries, is there any angle of cultural consideration someone in your field have to put into play when carrying out his responsibilities or his activities?
Yeah, that would be difficult for me to answer, honestly, because I honestly feel there's no real difference that I make in my conduct with people from whether they're from Europe or the United States or India. I deal with them the same way. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I, keep the conversation to the point, be respectful of the other person's time, and just try to solve a problem together if you're working with that.
Oh, that's very good.
That would be my answer.
I am not a specialist in trade compliance. You are, so that's why I had to ask that question. And then people who listen would tend to understand more because they don't have to also focus on how do I adjust my understanding with people. There's certain basic things that are important. Like you said, just be respectful, and keep time. That's very crucial that I've come to see in North America, particularly. They keep time. And so anyone coming from places where time is not a crucial factor, that person also needs to acculturize himself into an environment where you have to be prompt in dealings with time. So it's been a wonderful experience and a wonderful discussion with you. So for companies now that wants to start, so we want to start a department, we want to go do business that would involve serialization, what would you advise them to do?
I would say, so in order to implement a successful program, obviously there has to be quite a lot of dedicated effort. I would say that apart from the obvious things like understanding the requirements laid down by the government agencies, you have to be able to invest systems, the tools that will help you execute this plan. So you have to invest in strong ERP systems which can handle your business process and which are good for your business, right? So if you have warehouses, you have manufacturing facilities, you have point of sales or sales facilities, you partner with manufacturers or 3PLs. So you need an ERP system which has serialization or aggregation built into to manage this. So for small or medium businesses or someone just starting out, I would always say that they can always explore some niche or specialized products in this category, and they don't have to go out with a big bang ERP, SAP or Oracle implementation. They can explore smaller cloud-based solutions that have a monthly subscription fee that can, really plug and play kind of solutions.
Okay.
But
go
they
on,
have
please.
to be careful about, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to plug in the aspect of data governance into this, that along with using such a system comes the responsibility of governing your data that you're going to create in this environment. So it's responsibility to clean data, migrate it properly, and use it properly.
So now the bigger concern that many young professionals have, or even students who want to veer into your field, is AI. Do you think that in the future, AI will be a threat to this profession? Do you think that AI is going to replace professions like trade compliance? Do you think that fields like that will be replaced by AI in the future?
Certainly not. Certainly not. I would say that just like any other field, it will modify what you need to excel in that field. You need to be able to work with some of these AI tools, or at least at a high level, understand how they are transforming your activity. In fact, it makes it more exciting, I would say, because with the advent of AI, you have, more automation available at your hands to predict what's going to happen with a certain shipment. If you have hundreds of routes on which you are distributing the product, AI might be able to predict where storage conditions might vary more compared to others and things like that. Another application is that a combination of AI with IoT and blockchain is going to give you a digital wallet of each shipment, which has non-modifiable history of how this shipment has transformed from source to destination. So a lot of developments are, of course, taking place, and all these big firms technology firms are coming up with so many new solutions. As a starter in this space, so it's just that you need to be able to work with those. So you need to upskill a little bit on how AI is transforming the field. And if you're able to, have a conversation with business around, with the various stakeholders that you interact with, from the business side, from the technology side, from external partners, logistics, etc. If you're able to keep up with the conversation, that's what you need, to play your role. But the role is not going.
So you've heard about it. He said it. He's a professional in the field. He's an expert in the field, and he's saying that AI is not taking our roles or the roles of trade compliance officers, but rather it will be as a huge support to those roles. So what's your final advice for trade compliance personnel, younger ones who want to be professionals in trade compliance, in serialization, in aggregation? Based on your experience, what is one solid advice you can give for them?
I would say that this is a very specialized field. It is quite exciting as well, because there's obviously not many people who can compete in this space. If you have the skill set, you have the knowledge of the business process, you can be a precious commodity for a lot of firms, including pharmaceutical firms. These technologies are implemented in a variety of industries, so there's no shortage of requirements when you go looking out. So I would encourage everyone to, like I mentioned, develop knowledge on business process. Do not leave technology behind. Understand the ERP or the IT systems that enable this process. If you take these two hand in hand, I feel that you can convince anyone that you are a very valuable resource to have for any
organization. Does it pay well? That's something else. People like to know if the job pays. So, because for what I know I've seen some trade compliance personnel, they like the job, they enjoy the job, but they pay commercial rates to what they do. And so is that the same way with your own niche in the trade compliance department?
Yeah, I would say so. Of course, the pay might be different for someone starting out versus more experience. That difference is obviously there, but I would say that it does pay very well. Like I mentioned, it's a niche field. Not many people will be competitive to have the day-to-day challenges that this brings. So I definitely believe that with the right competence, it can, and with the right focus, with time, it can get
Thank you
very,
very
very
much, Mr.
rewarding.
Rohit.
And you can start your own business as well. Once you have expertise, you can consult independently, can try developing. If you see a business problem, you can try developing a software-based solution for that, things like that. So a lot of things to play with. It's an evolving
field. Rohit. We've really learned a lot from you today. We've seen what serialization, aggregation means, and the role it plays in trade compliance as well. We've seen that the job is a niche and it's not going to be replaced by AI tomorrow. And literally almost all businesses need trade compliance person. As long as you do international trade, you would need that. And we've learned a lot from you. And I like the fact that you brought in experiences and that you learned from your previous industry into trade compliance. So what you're telling us is that when you're moving from one company, one industry to another, there's always something that you can transfer from that industry into the new one. And then you made mention about how the US is also helping out with regards to, for instance, the example you made about fake drugs. And it's all boils down to serialization, because that's an idea. To be able to track a drug back to the manufacturer reduces the problem that such fake drugs bring in. So I really, really appreciate the time you carved out to spend with us today. And I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who benefit, younger ones who are still in school, or those of us who are professionals but want to move into trade compliance and then specialize in serialization, and that the pay is good. So we've learned a lot from that, and I really, really appreciate your time with us, Mr. Rohit. I do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was fantastic talking to you. You brought in a lot of good questions, and I certainly appreciate this opportunity to share my 2 cents on.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you very much. So this is how we're wrapping up this week's episode, and I look forward to discussing more with you. You can subscribe and follow us more. And the points or lessons you learn from here, please share with your colleagues and use it to help your business as you grow. Thank you very much.